Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Highlander is Coming to Town by Laura Trentham, narrated by Siiri Scott. Chapter 1. Claire Smythe, her chosen nom de guerre for her time on the road with the Skunners, her former Scottish rock band, heard a clamour coming from the far end of the narrow alley that opened to Main Street. She hesitated, weighing her options. Stepping into the crowd would go against her number one rule: avoid people. On the other hand, if she abandoned her errand, she would have ridden miles for nothing and would have to turn around and come back the next day. If she and Miss Meadows wanted something heartier than canned vegetables, then she would need to head to the shop. While leaving might be prudent, it was impractical. A brisk December wind cut down the alley, gaining in intensity and slicing through her many layers. Her wardrobe wasn't anywhere near winter-ready. She hadn't had the money to supplement her clothes with a decent jacket. Luckily, though, the Georgia winter was proving to be mild by her Scottish standards. Leaving her bike leaning up against the brick wall of the alley, Claire peeked around the corner. A large crowd was gathered in front of a newly painted Highland Antiques sign. A woman's voice coming through a microphone quieted the crowd noise. While she couldn't see over or through the crowd, she assumed the voice belonged to Anna Maitland, the newly elected mayor of Highland, Georgia. Claire hadn't paid close attention to local politics. After all, she wasn't going to be in Highland much longer, but Anna Maitland's name had stuck out because she had also been the woman in charge of last summer's Highland Festival, and the festival had been Claire's last performance as lead singer of the Skunners. She flipped the hood of her sweatshirt up before stepping out of the alley. With her eyes on the pavement under her feet, she made her way toward the shop, doing her best to blend in unnoticed. It was a far cry from her days strutting around on stage, doing her best to draw every single eye in the crowd. Anna Maitland thanked everyone for coming to the ribbon-cutting ceremony and welcomed the new business to Main Street. A smattering of applause followed. I also want to invite everyone to our first annual Burns Night holiday celebration the Saturday before Christmas. Main Street will be blocked to vehicles. Families will be free to enjoy music and shopping and food trucks. It's going to be a great time. Excited murmuring erupted throughout the crowd at the announcement. In Scotland, Burns Night celebrations were typically held in January after the holidays and during the dismal stretch of winter. As a Scottish singer, she'd been to her fair share and lent her voice to honor Robert Burns. The Highland, Georgia version sounded more elaborate and fun. But, of course, she wouldn't attend. A pang of remorse infiltrated her heart, even though she was the one avoiding making friends in Highland. Contrary to current appearances, she wasn't naturally a loner. Claire slipped into Highland Drug and Dime without attracting any interest from the crowd. She pushed her hood back and pulled Miss Meadows' list from her back pocket. Along with the typical staples of cornmeal, eggs, and bread, she had been tasked with getting some easy canned soups and pastas and peanut butter. The shop wasn't as big as a typical American grocery store, but it carried all the basics, and without a car, it was her only easy option. She gathered the items into a handheld basket and headed toward the checkout. Mentally, she parsed the items into the bag she used on her bike. It would be tight, but she should be able to manage without squashing the bread. The total on the register ticked up with every purchase. Claire pulled the wrinkled cash out of her pocket and bit the inside of her mouth, willing the numbers to quit rising so high. In the heated shop, her multi-layers of clothes were stifling, and a damp sweat had broken out across her shoulders and forehead. The tax put her over by less than $2. A queue had formed behind her, and her neck burned, but she didn't dare turn around. Leaning over the counter, she picked out 2 cans of ravioli and lowered her voice. "Could you take these off, please?" The lady behind the counter cast a cutting gaze over the register, her expression neutral, yet Claire couldn't help the shame that roiled through her stomach. Being poor was the same ignoble experience on either side of the pond. That she was currently poor by choice didn't alleviate the humiliation. "You can put those on my bill, Sandra," a man said behind her. Claire snatched a quick glance over her shoulder, ready to bluster her way through the situation, but her excuses died when she met the kindly eyes of Preacher Hopkins. While he didn't know everything about her, he knew more than most. After all, he had recommended her for the position with Miss Meadows. His smile, along with the half-moon reading glasses perched on his nose, gave him a benevolent air of wisdom. His afro was clipped short and graying, and his navy blue pants, white dress shirt, and red plaid bow tie gave him an air of neat professionalism that made her painfully aware of the frayed cuffs of her sweatshirt. "Thank you, sir." Claire cast her eyes back toward the counter, where Sandra packed up her purchases in 2 paper bags. Escape was only seconds away, but before she had even taken 2 steps toward the door, Preacher Hopkins touched the back of her hand. "I'd like a quick word, if I may, Miss Smythe." He laid his few items on the counter. Considering he had just paid for her dinner, she could hardly say no. Nodding stiffly, she retreated to a deserted aisle, out of the probing eyes of Sandra and everyone else in the line. Her shoulders and arms were already feeling the strain of the bags. Preacher Hopkins joined her. "I hear tell you and Miss Meadows are working out fine." While she wanted to ask who had been talking about her and what they had said, she controlled the panic in her voice. "Aye, we'd up along well." A middle-aged woman entered the aisle and greeted the preacher. Thankfully, he didn't introduce her to Claire. "If you need anything, you still have my number, I hope." "I do, yes." Not that she planned to use it, but it was comforting to know she had it in case of emergency. The past few months she'd lived without a safety net, and it had proved deuced uncomfortable. She sidestepped away from him. His gaze bounced between the door and her, a thoughtful expression knitting his brow. She could almost see the questions formulating. "If there's nothing else, I'll be going, sir," she said, before he could ask her anything else. "Tell Miss Meadows I'll stop by for a visit soon." With her hands full and her forearms burning, she nodded and strode to the door, stopping only long enough to prop one bag against a shelf, to raise her hood against curious gazes and the wind. She juggled the bags on her hips, her grip clumsy and becoming more so the longer she carried them. She stared at the entrance to the alley. Almost there. She would load her purchases and be back on the road in no time. A cuppa when she got back would restore her, and the groceries would keep them for the next week or so. A crack in the asphalt caught the toe of her shoe at the mouth of the alley. She staggered to catch her balance, her left shoulder bumping into the wall, and the bag scraping along the bricks. The load she was carrying lightened with an ominous rip. Groceries thumped and scattered. One of the ravioli cans rolled off-kilter toward the middle of the alley, the aluminum dented. She checked around her feet with a sigh of relief. It hadn't been the bag with the eggs. She might not cry over spilt milk, but she would weep like a ninny over cracked eggs. A muttering of Gaelic-flavored curses made her feel better, even if it wouldn't repair the bag. Squatting, she put the good bag down and shifted the torn bag like a babe in her arms to keep anything else from falling out. She gathered the closest item. "May I help?" a man asked from behind her. Still on her haunches, she whirled around, holding a bottle of generic aspirin at the ready. Not that it would do much to fend off a grown man. "What do you want?" She had tried to avoid speaking in town, even with Highland, Georgia's summer festival and the town motto of "the heart of the Highlands in the Blue Ridge." Her Scottish accent counted as unusual and invited too many questions for her comfort. The man held his hands up and spoke as if she were a spooked horse. "Just offering to help you gather your groceries." "What, are you following me?" "Of course not." He scooped up a can of soup that had rolled to his feet and held it out. "Thought you looked familiar, and I was trying to place you." His smile was nice, which immediately drew her suspicions. She rose, took 2 steps, and snatched the can out of his hand, retreating like a skittish dog. Her jerky movements shifted the bag, and a jar of peanut butter fell and cracked against the concrete, the plastic lid splitting in 2. She would salvage what she could. She could skim any grit off when she got home. The rest would be fine. Buying a new jar was out of the question. Peanut butter was expensive, and she had used all the money Miss Meadows had given her, and then some. It had happened. Rock bottom. The situation was even worse, because she was choosing this life. She could go home with her tail tucked and her pride in pieces. She just wasn't ready to face her parents or her cousin Lachlan. Not yet. The man moved closer. "Let me. I don't need your help." Her steely tone was weakened by the sound of the bag rending further. Not waiting for her permission, he plucked the torn bag out of the crook of her arm and cradled it with his big hands so nothing else could escape. "Of course you don't, but my mama would tan my hide if I didn't help anyway." They faced off in an impasse. The man's nice smile had rematerialized with a crooked charm she most certainly did not find irresistible. Not even close. Okay, maybe his smile was within shouting distance of irresistible. He looked familiar, but she found it impossible to place his face. His eyes were shadowed by a baseball cap, as so many American men favored. The hair curling at the edges was dark blonde. Her gaze trailed lower, taking in broad shoulders and a frame that made her heart kick, not from fear, but from awareness. His jeans fit snug and emphasized his muscular legs. An image tickled the edge of her memories. She stripped his pants off, mentally, not physically, unfortunately, and superimposed a kilt. He was the man who had won Laird of the Games at the Highland Festival over the summer. She had watched him throw the hammer and toss the caber with no small amount of admiration. While countless men had worn kilts during the festival, this man had worn his better than all of them. Not that she had planned on telling a virtual stranger his thighs had featured in her dreams. She picked up the intact bag and headed to her bike, where it leaned up against the wall. She never bothered to lock it up. Highland was a small, safe town, part of the reason she had stayed on after the festival. Even besides the lack of crime, the bike wasn't the stuff of a thief's dreams. The rims were rusty, and one side of the handlebars had lost its grip, leaving an exposed metal rod. Third gear was iffy, and the brake squealed. Still, it was better than walking, and between the front basket and a canvas saddlebag, she was able to fit a good amount of groceries. She repacked the items from her bag into the front basket, including the eggs, a loaf of white bread, a half-gallon of milk, and tea bags, among other staples. Nothing that could be considered an indulgence, except maybe for the tea. He followed her, and without a word she packed the items out of the bag he held into the back satchel. This included the peanut butter, baking potatoes, cans of soup and the ravioli, and an assortment of ramen noodle packages. "I guess I should thank you," she said grudgingly. Her etiquette teacher would be horrified. "You're welcome." He crumpled the ripped paper bag and continued to fiddle with it, even after it was a compact ball. His hands were strong, and looked like they were used to a different sort of work than her musician friends. What did he do when he wasn't tossing cabers? The question almost made it to her lips before she stopped herself. Small talk was an invitation to disaster. She gave him a brief nod, straddled her bike, and pedaled away. Was he still watching? She didn't look back, more because of fear of crashing and breaking her precious eggs than pride. When she made the turn onto Maple Street, she allowed herself a peek. The mouth of the alley was empty. Of course he wasn't there. Good. She didn't want him looking at her and wondering about her. Letting go of the tiniest niggle of disappointment, she focused on the road. Yellow and red leaves canopied the street on long branches and danced in the wind. Some of them jumped and twirled to join their brethren on the ground. The carpet of different colors was breathtaking and reminded her of the hand-stitched quilt on her bed at Miss Meadows's house. Autumn in Highland had proved to be unexpectedly lovely. She made another turn, this time onto a narrow country road. Trees hemmed her in on the left, while open fields and fences stretched to her right. Cows and horses grazed, and farmhouses stood sentinel in the distance. The solitude was comforting after the unexpected crowd in town and the run-ins with the preacher and the mysterious laird of the games. Claire took a deep breath. The faint scent of wood smoke hung in the air over the loamy forest. Every turn of the petals unwound a portion of her tension. She wasn't sure when she had started to think of Miss Meadows's little house as not just a haven, but a home. She loved her cluttered, cozy room and the shabby comfort of the old house in general. Her front wheel bucked to the side and jerked her wandering thoughts back to more practical matters, like her less-than-reliable transportation. She slowed to a stop and bent over the handlebars to take stock. Her front tire was flat. She should have stayed in bed today. She pushed the bike along the verge, cursing everything from the universe to the rocks along the side of the road. How far was she from Miss Meadows? Farther than she'd like, but it was walkable, even with a bike heavy with groceries. She trudged along for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes, the exertion combining with her many layers of clothes to make her feel uncomfortable. Just as she was considering stripping off her sweatshirt, the sound of a truck roared behind her. She guided her bike onto the grass and paused to let the truck pass on the narrow road, keeping her head down. Ignoring her "leave me alone" body language, the driver pulled the behemoth next to her and idled, the diesel engine loud. "Can I give you a ride?" The rich, honeyed voice was only too familiar, considering she'd replayed her brief conversation with him twice already. He was making it a habit to catch her in vulnerable positions. Was it dumb luck or punishment from the universe? "No." She glanced his direction to assess his reaction to her rudeness. She wouldn't blame him if he told her off and drove away. Instead, he smiled. It was both reassuring and unbalancing. "I'm basically harmless, I promise." She couldn't stop the sass. "Basically harmless. Not exactly a resounding recommendation. I find it creepy that you're following me." "I'm not following you." He gestured toward the windscreen. "I live 5 or 6 miles down the road." She waffled between wanting to remain aloof and begging him for a ride. "I can't rightly drive off and leave you here. People fly up and down this road, and there's hardly any shoulder. Either you let me give you a ride, or I'll trail alongside you until you get home. How far do you have to go?" "Not far." "It will go faster for both of us if you let me give you a lift. How about it?" She debated the merits of accepting. He would know where she was staying, which she'd prefer to avoid. On the other hand, she'd already been gone longer than she liked, and his ride would get her back to Miss Meadows faster, which was good. She would also avoid blisters, which was even better. All considered, she gave him a nod. He maneuvered the truck ahead of her, one half in knee-high scrub grass. After loading her bike into the bed, he opened the passenger door and pushed his own shopping bags to the middle to make room. She took a quick inventory: beer, frozen pizza, and a banana cream pie. While the beer and pizza didn't interest her, her mouth watered at the thought of the pie. The truck sat high off the ground. How in blazes was a normal-sized human supposed to get in? She grabbed the side of the seat and attempted to haul herself up, but her arms were jelly-like after carrying the groceries earlier and pushing the bike up the rolling hills. She tried twice and failed, every nerve ending conscious of the man behind her. Without warning, the hands she had watched so intently in the alley clamped around her waist and plopped her on the seat. She turned on him with her fists raised, but he didn't try to cop a feel like some blokes would have. He took 2 stumbling steps backward, windmilling when his heel caught on a divot of soft ground. After he regained his balance, they regarded each other like prey and predator. He held up his hands as if surrendering. "I didn't mean to scare you, miss." By the devil, he was strong and attractive in the most American way possible, with his jeans and ball cap and smile. "Keep your bloody hands to yourself next time." The quaver in her voice wasn't from fear, but she had no time for a flirtation, much less a dalliance. She barely stemmed a sound of disgust at herself before slamming the door shut. He circled around the front of the truck through the high grass and climbed into the driver's seat. Once he got them back on the road, he asked, "Where am I dropping you?" "At the top of Meadows Lane." The truck lurched, telegraphing his surprise. "Are you staying with old Miss Meadows?" "Aye." Curious at his reaction, she shot a glance in his direction, even if it meant accidentally meeting his gaze. Claire had taken a position as live-in helper for the housebound elderly widow. While Miss Meadows could still do the basics for herself, like washing and dressing, Claire had taken over the tidying and shopping and cooking. Although it had taken a few frustrating weeks for her to learn to prepare the dishes Miss Meadows liked, Claire had never made turnip greens or okra or cornbread. Now she did a bang-up job with Southern staples. The house sat in what Miss Meadows called a holler, surrounded by woods. The setting was the stuff of a brother's grim tale, but Miss Meadows was nothing like an evil witch. In fact, the longer Claire stayed, the more the old lady resembled a fairy godmother, albeit a cranky, sharp-tongued one. Holt Pierson, by the way. What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, loath to surrender any more information than she already had, meager though it was. "Claire. Nice to meet you." She made a throaty sound of acknowledgement, but didn't return the sentiment. "Do I take it your skills don't extend to the kitchen?" "And what would you know about my skills?" The tease veered naughty, Or was that merely her imagination? After all, she had been the one examining the way the denim of his jeans hugged his thighs earlier. The curse of the fair-skinned struck as heat washed over her. "I remember where I've seen you before. You competed at the festival this summer and won Laird of the Games. That's all I was referring to, I can assure you." "Isn't that a coincidence? I watched you perform at the festival, too." He tossed a leading glance toward her, but she forced herself not to react. "Are you sticking around Highland for a while?" he asked. "Here it is. You can let me out at the top. Thanks." She pointed to where overgrown bushes camouflaged the start of a gravel lane. The old mailbox needed a coat of paint and legible numbers, and the red flag dangled toward the ground like the standard of a defeated army. Claire found sliding out of the truck easier than climbing in, but Holt still beat her to the truck bed. He lifted her bike out, replacing the grocery items that had fallen out of the saddlebags and basket. Their hands brushed when she took the handles from him. Just lovely. His large hands were going to join his thighs in her dreams tonight, which was dangerous, considering how much more nimble hands were than thighs. "Thanks for the ride." She ducked between the bushes. "Maybe I'll see you around?" Holt called out. "Maybe." Not a chance. Holt Pierson already knew more about her than she was comfortable with. Only when the growl of his truck grew distant did she relax. Disaster averted. Chapter 2. The bang of the screen door sent a mild shot of adrenaline through Claire. Her run-in with Holt Pierson the day before had shaken her sense of safety. The clack of Miss Meadows's cane against the wood floors smoothed her frazzled nerves. The 2+ months she'd spent taking care of Miss Meadows, and having Miss Meadows take care of her, had provided a much-needed refuge for her to consider and plan away from the machinations of her family. She'd grown comfortable, perhaps too comfortable. She had thought herself nearly invisible on her weekly run to the shops in Highland for food and sundry items for the house. No one had recognized her from the festival, except for Holt Pierson, which made her wonder what else he saw when he looked at her. She ran a hand through her now shaggy hair, hardly even missing the spiky pixie cut she'd maintained for her stage persona as the lead singer of the Scunners, the band that had played the Highland Summer Festival for 2 years running. She was a long way from the woman who'd strutted the stage and commanded an audience with a confidence she'd never been able to manifest out of the spotlight. Miss Meadows clacked her way into the kitchen, her cane and uneven gait playing out a rhythm that had become oddly comforting. "What's for lunch, girl?" Claire had put together a simple tuna salad using canned tuna and the last of the mayonnaise, which meant another trip to town soon. Plus, she'd somehow not made it home with the precious jar of peanut butter. Blast Holt Pierson and flimsy paper bags. "Tuna salad sandwich?" Claire carefully set out the delicate china plates Miss Meadows insisted they use for their meals, then helped Miss Meadows onto the wooden chair before taking the seat across the table. The china pieces weren't as old or expensive as the dishes Claire had grown up with, but they were priceless nevertheless. Miss Meadows's mother had received them as a wedding present and passed them along. The sentimental value made Claire handle them like mini-primed bombs. Miss Meadows took a bite of the sandwich and made a little sound Claire took as satisfaction. The weeks of daily lessons had taught Claire how to cook to Miss Meadows's standards, which would have satisfied even Gordon Ramsay. Claire had never seen her mother enter the kitchens, except to hand a menu to the cook and housekeeper. As a result, Claire hadn't...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?